are these people?
Yeah, this story is going to be of my two the longer of the two. So we're gonna do. So here's how we're gonna do it. And shout out to Ben Norton, who I'm going to use as far as his YouTube clip and the article that he wrote regarding this issue in Niger. However, I will admit I'm not a fan of the article and the way he wrote it, so I'm not going to read all of it. Plus, if I read all of it, this would be an hour segment. If you want to read it at your own time, there is the link in our description if you want to read the whole thing in full. But in the video, and a nice afterthought, I probably should have clipped the video instead of doing the article, but I think either way would be better. Probably would be short this way. So Ben is going to give a very brief overview of what's been happening in Niger. So, and as I said, the article I'm going to be using comes from Scheerpost and Popular Resistance, where he wrote, U.S. and France threaten intervention in resource-rich Niger. So we're going to take a few minutes. He's going to give a little overview of what's happening in Niger. We'll go into it a little bit more in depth, and I'm sure you guys will have some comments, and I'm sure you do too. We'll talk about a little bit more. So yeah, if you want to play the clip.
Yep, working on it. Hold on. Full screen. Here. Play.
The United States and France are threatening foreign intervention in West Africa, in particular in the country of Niger, where a pro-Western government was overthrown. This is a region of the world that is very rich in natural resources and is also very strategic for the United States and France. Of course, France colonized West Africa and still maintains many neo-colonial policies, which I'll be discussing today. But also, the United States has one of its largest and most important drone bases based in Niger. And Niger is one of the world's largest producers of uranium. And uranium is used for European energy, especially France, a country that has a lot of nuclear energy.
Especially since they stopped taking gas from other foreign powers.
Right.
As well, Niger is a major producer of gold. So the possibility of a foreign military intervention in Niger and potentially other West African nations is very seriously on the table. It is a threat that many countries in West Africa are taking seriously. And we have seen statements from neighboring countries of Niger that have similar governments, like in Burkina Faso and also in Mali, that have said that if there is a foreign intervention, they would consider this a declaration of war. The possibility of war breaking out in West Africa is very real. And as is pretty much always the case, Western powers are the ones fueling the fire of this conflict and threatening war. Let's not forget that this is a region where there were very recent examples of Western military intervention. In 2013 and 2014, France led a military intervention in Mali, a neighbor of Niger. And in 2011, NATO, led by the United States with the support of France and Canada and other European nations, destroyed the central government of Libya that was led by the revolutionary leader Muammar Gaddafi. They killed Gaddafi, and still today, a decade later, Libya has no central government. It's been in a state of civil war, and now there's a possibility of the Western powers expanding that conflict to the west and to the south, to the Sahel region. So today we're going to talk about what's going on in Niger, also in Burkina Faso and Mali and Guinea, and the threats of Western military intervention. Now, I will clarify at the beginning here, I am definitely not an Africa expert. I would never claim to be an Africa expert, but I've done a lot of research on these events, and I want to talk about the geopolitical and economic implications and how this is part of a larger international campaign by the United States and by European colonial powers to reassert a kind of neo-colonial policy politically and economically, in particular on resource-rich countries in the global south. Africa is an extremely resource-rich continent, and the Western powers have relied on exploiting its mineral wealth and exploiting the labor of African workers in order to get rich and in order to maintain their riches and their inequality. Almost all of West Africa was colonized by France, which committed brutal war crimes and atrocities. It committed genocide. It used concentration camps, the same kind of policies that the Nazis also used, the French Empire used in Africa. And today we see that many of these nationalist military leaders in countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali are invoking the historical legacy of the anti-colonial movements and even revolutionary socialist movements like Thomas Sankara's movement that he led, the revolution he led in Burkina Faso in the 1980s. And the French government is really trying to reimpose its neo-colonial control over these former colonial territories.
Okay. So he just basically gave an overview of what's going on. So now what we're going to do is go into the article where he extends a lot of what he said a little bit more. Like I said, I'm not pulling everything because it's a long article. I actually had pulled half of it, and I feel it's still a lot. But there's enough information here that you get the gist as to why the issue in Niger is problematic, and I believe in a lot of ways how it's going to be more of a problem, for us down the road, probably within the next few months. By the way, this is going especially with what happened today. So Ben writes, the leaders of the new government in Niger publicly warned that France is plotting military intervention. Paris is looking for ways and means to intervene militarily in Niger, the authorities said, saying that French officials met with the chief of staff of Niger's National Guard to attain the necessary political and military authorization, The Guardian reported. The British newspaper described Niger's toppled president, Bazoum, as an ally of Western powers. Oh,
There you go.
there we go. Along with Paris, the U.S. State Department is actively coordinating with Bazoum and plotting to put its ally back in power. To give supposed multilateral cover to their plans for intervention, the U.S. and France have been working closely with the Economic Community of Western African States, ECOWAS. Rutgers purported that ECOWAS and West African defense chiefs have drawn up a plan for military action if Niger's coup is not overturned. And here's a cartoon that you pulled from me from African Stream that basically, that's Macron telling ECOWAS, so basically the idea of using Black African
soldiers,
NATO puppets,
yeah,
to do their dirty work for them. So,
I like
but
the, I
as
like
we
the
see,
Napoleon outfit here.
Yeah.
Very good.
yeah. But as we're going to see later, few African countries are not going to have that. So the UK-based news outlet emphasized, given its uranium and oil riches and pivotal role in the war with Islamic rebels in the Sahel region, Niger has strategic significance for the United States, China, Europe, and Russia. ECOWAS imposed sanctions on Niger, and the country's southern neighbor, Nigeria, has begun establishing a de facto blockade.
Yep.
Because Nigeria is
Owned
also
by
a puppet.
France and us, yeah.
Yeah. More us, if anything else. Niger previously received roughly 70% of its electricity from Nigeria, but the Nigerian government, which is closely allied with the West, has now cut off that power. Solidarity much? No? Foreign intervention may be easier said than done, however, because Niger's neighbors have come to its defense. The governments in Burkina Faso and Mali released a joint statement stating that any military intervention against Niger would be tantamount to a declaration of war against Burkina Faso and Mali. The West African nations warned that the disastrous consequences of a military intervention in Niger could destabilize the entire region, France 24 reported. Burkina Faso and Mali also condemned the illegal, illegitimate, and inhumane sanctions that Western governments have imposed against the people and authorities of Niger.
So essentially,
so we're gonna
they're going.
Catch me outside. How about that?
basically,
Like,
yeah. And to give you more as proof of that, we're gonna play a short clip. This is Ibrahim Traoré. He is now the transitional president of Burkina Faso. He led a military coup in the country and overthrew Jean-Henri Sandaogo last year. So he's gotten a lot of attention, at least on Twitter recently, especially. And we saw his picture when we talked about the Russia-Africa summit last week. So it's in French, but it's subtitled so you can understand what he's saying. But listen to what he says.
On se sent en famille en ce sens que la Russie est une famille aussi pour l'Afrique. C'est une famille parce que nous avons la même histoire. La Russie a consenti d'énormes sacrifices pour libérer le monde du nazisme pendant la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Les peuples africains, nos grands-pères, ont été déportés de force aussi pour aider l'Europe à se débarrasser du nazisme. Nous partageons la même histoire en ce sens que nous sommes les peuples oubliés du monde, qu'ils soient dans les livres d'histoire, dans les documentaires ou films. On tend donc à balayer le rôle prépondérant qu'a joué la Russie et de l'Afrique dans cette lutte contre le nazisme. Pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso, aujourd'hui nous sommes confrontés depuis plus de 8 ans à la forme de manifestation la plus barbare, la plus violente du néocolonialisme, de l'impérialisme. L'esclavage qu'on tend encore à nous imposer. Nos dévanciers nous ont bien appris une chose. L'esclave qui n'est pas capable d'assumer sa révolte ne mérite pas que l'on s'apitoie sur son sort. Nous ne nous apitoyons pas sur nos sorts, on ne demande pas que quelqu'un s'apitoie sur notre sort. Le peuple burkinabé a décidé de lutter contre le terrorisme en mesure de relancer son développement. Dans cette lutte, des vaillants peuples, des vaillantes populations se sont engagées à prendre les armes face au terrorisme, ceux que nous avons affectueusement appelés les VDP, des volontaires. Nous sommes surpris de voir les impérialistes traiter ces VDP de milices et de tout type. C'est décevant, parce qu'en Europe, lorsque des peuples prennent les armes pour défendre leur patrie, on les traite de patriotes. Mais là n'est pas le problème. Ce qui est le problème, c'est de voir des chefs d'État africains qui n'apportent rien à ces peuples qui se battent, mais qui chantent la même chose que les impérialistes en nous traitant de milices, en nous traitant donc d'hommes qui ne respectent pas les droits de l'homme. De quels droits de l'homme parle-t-on? Nous nous offusquons contre cela et c'est honteux. Il faut que nous, chefs d'État africains, nous arrêtons de nous comporter donc en marionnettes qui dansent à chaque fois que les impérialistes tirent sur les ficelles. Hier, le président Vladimir Poutine a annoncé donc l'envoi de céréales en Afrique. Nous sommes bien contents. Nous lui disons merci pour cela. Mais aussi, c'est un message passé à nous, chefs d'État africains, parce qu'au prochain forum, nous ne devrons pas venir ici sans avoir assuré, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas la guerre, l'autosuffisance alimentaire de nos peuples. Nous devons prendre l'expérience de ceux qui ont pu déjà atteindre cela en Afrique, tisser de bonnes relations ici et tisser de meilleures relations avec la Fédération de Russie pour pouvoir assouvir les besoins de nos populations. Gloire à nos peuples, dignité à nos peuples, victoire à nos peuples. La patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons. Merci, camarades.
So,
yeah.
called out the West, but he also called out his African colleagues as well, which which is surprising to say that it's rare, but it is.
Sorry.
To hear Traoré, speak with that kind of conviction in terms of what has happened in his country and calling out the West. It's like, hey, you're calling us militias because we're fighting against you.
Yeah.
But when you do it, it's okay.
Right.
So, but
or when Ukraine does it,
it's
fine.
Right. So he was not saying this, I feel not just for Burkina Faso. He was also saying that I think he was just saying this for Africa in general, and I think especially what's happening in Niger, I think a lot of what he said there can also kind of
And I think
accommodate.
he was the one who I saw had been talking about that African leaders are going to these summits begging for Africa, essentially.
Right.
So,
right.
He's a bit of a standoutish guy in that.
Right. So you would argue, and I know a lot of people might say very nationalist in scope, but at the same time, and he did mention, thankful for Putin as far as his,
help,
generosity as far as grain, and then like forgiving loans in Africa, and that's, I mean, it's good, but ultimately it's the idea, as he said, Africa is rich in its own right. And really, they shouldn't need the support of the Western world and either Russia and China to take care of their own people. So but the idea that you're hearing this kind of stands from an African leader in this time, I think is very welcomed. And so, as you said, it's basically like, step with us and you'll find out. Step to us, you'll find out what will happen to you. So
I'm gonna hit you upside with a fucking folding chair. Y'all better watch out. I'm telling you right now.
Right. So anyway, let's get back into the article. In late July 2023, when Niger's president Mohamed Bazoum was overthrown, the United States and France immediately sprung into action, condemning his ouster and demanding that the pro-Western leader be reinstated. Many African activists highlighted the overwhelming hypocrisy of his response and of Western rhetoric about promoting democracy. In the past century, the US and European powers have legitimized, supported, and even organized dozens of coups across the global South in order to advance their economic and geopolitical interests.
Wrong way.
Oh, I put it here too. Oh,
yeah,
that's right. One of the most well-known historical episodes was that of Patrice Lumumba, the founder of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo had been a Belgian colony. Under brutal King Leopold II, Belgium committed genocide there, killing half of the Congolese population.
Half.
Lumumba helped lead an independence movement against European colonialism and was democratically elected to the DRC's first prime minister in 1960. US President Dwight Eisenhower ordered the CIA to assassinate Lumumba. With the help from the spy agency, Belgium supported a coup to remove him. The democratic elected Congolese leader was kidnapped and murdered. His body was subsequently dissolved, his body in acid. Just a few teeth were left behind.
Jesus.
This is how Western governments treated anti-colonial leaders during the First Cold War. They sponsored coups to remove them and subsequently installed and propped up right-wing pro-imperialist dictatorships that ruled for decades with an iron fist. The Western response to the July 2023 coup in Niger was completely different. Immediately, the French government denounced a new nationalist government led by the military. Emmanuel Macron's office vowed a strong and swift response, writing, "The president will not tolerate any attack against France in its interests," meaning uranium, specifically emphasizing its business interests in Niger. Uranium.
Yeah. It's like Trump saying it's for the oil.
Right. Well, except they're not as explicit as that.
Yes.
It's just our interests versus your resources.
Yeah. Yes, we would like all of your resources that we've been taking, please. How dare you not let us steal from you?
While sponsoring unelected coup regimes in Pakistan and Peru, the U.S. State Department also quickly released a statement condemning the new military government in Niger. The United States welcomes and commends the strong leadership of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, heads of state and government to defend constitutional order in Niger, it wrote. Referring to Niger's tuckled pro-Western leader, Washington called for the immediate release of President Mohamed Bazoum and his family and the restoration of all state functions.
The big
The U.S.
bazooms.
added that
Sorry,
the
continue.
U.S. added that the U.S. added that it welcomes the dispatch of the special representative of the ECOWAS chair to Niger and will remain actively engaged with ECOWAS and West African leaders on next steps to preserve Nigeria's hard-earned democracy. By instrumentalizing ECOWAS to give unilateral cover to an intervention in Niger, the US and France are returning to the strategy they employed when they used NATO to wage war on Libya in 2011. At the same moment, the Western powers are also doing the same to justify another military intervention in Haiti, recreating an international alliance ostensibly led by Kenya to occupy the Caribbean nation. One of the principal economic interests that the West won't say that Western powers have in Niger is its uranium. The anti-poverty organization Foxfam published a report in 2013.
Yeah,
Oxfam,
they're shitty as shit, but yes.
Yeah, they are. Detailing how France was making a killing profiting off the uranium in Niger, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. The people of Niger, known as Nigerians, not to be confused with Nigerians from Nigeria, have seen almost no benefits from this uranium extraction. I mean,
yeah, how would they?
Oxfam cited a Nigerian activist who noted, in France, one of every free light bulbs is lit, thanks to Nigerian uranium. In Niger, nearly 90% of the population has no access to electricity. This situation cannot continue. It is incomprehensible that Niger, the world's fourth largest uranium producer and a strategic supplier for Area and France, is not taking advantage of the revenue from this extraction and remains one of the poorest countries on the planet, an Oxfam researcher added. The statistics have slightly changed in the decades since that report was published. As of 2023, Niger is the world's seventh biggest producer of uranium. But many Western media outlets have noted with fear how important Niger is for European energy stability. As you mentioned earlier, Niger coup sparks concerns about French EU uranium dependency, Politico warned. Niger supplies 15% of France's uranium needs and accounts for a fifth of the EU's total uranium imports, the media outlet reported. In 2021, Niger was the EU's top uranium supplier, followed by Kazakhstan and Russia. So
Kazakhstan, yeah.
So, well, this is when this is the problem with, NATO, basically the West putting sanctions on Russia, which has now affected their energy sources in Europe, especially Germany right now. Because Germany is in a recession. Now they're looking to Africa to be like, okay, since we can't get our shit from Russia, we're going to take more shit from you. So, but anyway, Politico added that the coup in Niger could be a challenge for Europe's uranium needs in the longer term, just as the continent is trying to phase out dependency on Russia, another top supplier of uranium used in European nuclear plants. Nuclear energy is relatively important in Europe. In 2022, it made up around 10% of EU energy consumption, slightly down from a peak of nearly 14% in 2002. In France, nuclear energy is even more significant. Since the 1980s, nuclear has become one of its top energy resources. By the 2000s, France's nuclear power exceeded its use of oil, peaking at nearly 40% in 2005. Nuclear still remains strong in 2021 at 36.5% of the total energy consumption, compared to 31% for oil.
Nope, right.
Since the coup in Niger, both France and EU leadership have insisted that they will not be affected, stating that they have enough uranium in their reserves to last a few years. But if the nationalist government remains in power in Niger and abides by its alleged plans to cut off uranium exports, Europe could face economic consequences. This also comes at a complicated moment for Europe, which has led to boycott Russian oil exports and reduce imports of Russian gas. So essentially, Europe has fucked themselves over in the foot.
That's called cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Right.
That's what that's called.
Some EU officials have proposed increasing nuclear energy production to end the region's energy reliance on Russia. But now one of the top providers of uranium the EU needs for that nuclear energy has seen a coup led by nationalists who oppose Europe's neo-colonial policies. This also comes at a moment in which several countries in Europe are going into recession. Germany, the manufacturing superpower at the heart of the EU, is deindustrializing
Yeah, that one's tough.
at breakneck speed, largely because it has lost major sources of the cheap energy that its heavy industry needs.
Yeah.
In addition to foreign economic designs on West Africa, the U.S. military has a massive footprint on the region, particularly in Niger, where it operates multiple bases. We talked about CARICOM, AFRICOM, how it's involved. Also have a link talking about AFRICOM, I think last spring, I believe. And I think we reported that we don't know how many bases are in Africa because...
We might have done that with JB.
No, I don't think that was with JB. But we don't know exactly how many military bases.
Yeah, and when asked, we're like, I don't know.
Right.
You know, so sure.
A 2019 report in PBS noted an increasing U.S. military presence in Africa, revealing that the Pentagon had nearly 800 personnel stationed in Niger. That figure later rose to roughly 1,000. General Thomas Waldhauser, the commander of the U.S. military forces in Africa, described Niger's pro-Western government as a good partner in a very, very bad... The phrasing, though.
Yeah, that's real shitty. Yeah.
A good partner in a very, very bad neighborhood.
Right. They're one of the good ones. That's what that is. They're a good one. You know, they're not like those other ones with their music and their pants sagging. Like,
right.
You know, like, okay. You know, just dog whistling right in front of us, but okay.
Right. PBS indicated that the U.S. military was creating a base in Agadez, Niger, which will be the largest installation Air Force personnel have ever built. The U.S. has been operating drone missions out of another base in Niger's capital since 2013, the media outlet wrote, adding, the CIA is also believed to be using another drone base in northeastern Niger. Investigative journalist Nick Turst, reporting in 2023, described this U.S. facility in Niger, Airbase 201, as the linchpin of the U.S. military's archipelago of bases in North and West Africa, and a key part of America's wide-ranging intelligence, surveillance, and security efforts in the region.
Okay.
What is striking is the neocolonial symbolism of the United States, maintaining these high-tech military facilities worth hundreds of millions of dollars in Niger, one of the most poorest countries on Earth, where the majority of the population doesn't even have access to electricity. Before the July 2023 coup, Washington saw the Nigerian government as a key ally in its attempt to isolate China and Russia. Again, we can guess why. Anthony Blinken took a historic trip to Niger in March in the first ever visit by U.S. Secretary of State. Democracy Now! Noted that this trip was part of the Biden administration's growing competition with China and Russia.
Which Victoria Newland's going over there too, right?
Yep.
I do believe.
And she got told. Basically.
Okay.
According to reports today. Niger is one of the last strongholds of U.S. security partnerships in the region, Brown University researcher Stephanie Sewell told the media outlet. Blinken's visit came just a few months after the State Department's December 22 U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which brought African heads of state to Washington, D.C. to meet with Biden. The State Department wrote that the summit was rooted in this recognition that Africa is a key geopolitical player. In other words, Washington sees the continent as highly strategic in its new Cold War against China and Russia.
And it's definitely going to try to keep its strategic advantages. So,
yes.
By whatever means necessary.
Right. So that was long, and there was a lot of information in that. And like I said, it was even longer. As I said, the full article, if you want to read it, is in the description. Shout out to our friend, Fiorella Isabel. She made a tweet that I think sums this up perfectly.
Yeah.
In a few tweets, and she did this in 3 tweets versus a long article. She wrote, "The Niger coup isn't a standalone coup, but a continued wave of rebellion by West African nations and the continent against the unilateral neocolonial policies of the West. Niger ousted a U.S. NATO-backed government that was led by France, using good old neocolonialism to exploit the resource-rich country by keeping its people without electricity, 80% are without, but using those same resources to maintain their EU lifestyle. Niger had enough. Burkina Faso, with young revolutionary Ibrahim Traoré as its leader, stands with Niger, as does Mali, both having also ousted the French neocolonialist military, and have said that any Western military involvement in Niger would be the equivalent of a declaration of war against them. Algeria and Guinea backed the coup.
Please, Fee, come on.
Yeah, there's one more after this. ECOWAS, masked as a union for Africa, but really backs a NATO agenda on control of the state's resources by the West. These nations see that and have asked the bloc to stand with their people. Instead, the bloc has sanctioned Niger and put severe economic and travel restrictions. The bloc is supported by France and the US, and most countries, including Russia, want diplomacy and to work within the bloc. But it's more complex than that. As the Russia-Africa summit just concluded with Libya and others voicing their opposition to foreign interference and asking both Russia and other African states for their aid in ousting them. You also have Wagner in the region, as well as Putin's promise to discuss the matter. Diplomacy is one thing, but Russia and Africa both highlighted their allegiance based on mutual respect going back to Soviet times, and this is only growing stronger.
Mm-hmm.
China is also building on this relationship along with the BRICS bloc.
Yep.
What we are seeing is African states begin to unite, and I won't paint it as easy, rainbows or something happening overnight, but the Pan-Africanism and the dreams of Sankara and Gaddafi have been echoed by many current leaders as beginning to take mold in this emerging multipolar world, as Africa has done nothing but demand the respect of the national sovereignty for the respective nations. Make no mistake that the hegemon will fight back. An injured beast lashes out even more after all. France depends on this uranium, and Africa is a continent that has been partitioned into sections of resources for the Western garden to exploit. But we are seeing the start of an actual revolution in a continent that the majority of the industrialized first world ignored for so long. Strap in, the most overlooked region full of determined and passionate people is rising, along with the entire global South. And for once, citizens of the West might finally be forced to understand what Western-centric exceptionalism means and how that nice style that is built on the back of war, famine, and exploitation is coming to a close, and the fall will be brutal.
I hope so, Fee. Hope we make it out.
Very beautifully worded.
Yep.
So we have some breaking news.
Okay.
Because as of today, France decided to do some shit. Shout out to our friend Nico, friend of the network.
Yep.
He posted this earlier because France actually did what they said they were going to do.
Cool.
So go ahead.
Rolling the bean footage.
This is not a drill. The Niger junta has said that the French armed forces have attacked Niger's National Guard and violated their no-fly zone ordinance. Now, France has denied all of these accusations. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really fucking believe them, but they denied it. Now, a few days ago, I did a video specifically detailing why France has the most to lose if Niger's coup was to stay in place. And I said that they would be the ones to attack. And if what the junta is claiming is true, then France literally just said, fuck ECOWAS, fuck international borders, fuck international law. We're going to invade because our country literally cannot survive without stealing uranium from Niger. Now, some were claiming that this was merely just another coup in Africa and it will be quelled just like all the other coups. And most people won't really care about it. And I had been saying for some time that this could spark World War III because there are too many resources, too much oil, too much gas, too much uranium, too much gold, and too much dignity at stake for neocolonialists. They can't and they could not let this slide. And with the pipeline that is supposed to be built through Niger at stake as well, corporations couldn't afford to let this slide. This is going to get worse before it gets better.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and I was saying this earlier to you. This will probably be a rant. Not probably, it will be a rant. Don't think, and we've said this on the show in many different situations, but don't think what is happening in Niger is not going to affect us here in the West. Well, in the United States.
Yeah.
Because if France, because I can't see, Niger and those countries in West Africa like Burkina Faso and Mali backing down. And I think it's funny, and I also said this earlier before we went live, what happened over the weekend regarding the Montgomery call. You guys know about it, I'm sure, if you guys were on Twitter over the weekend. So we don't have to explain that. But I don't think it's a coincidence with what happened in Alabama is also happening in Niger at around the same time. And I think this is kind of an indication of the fact that the working class, and especially those in marginalized communities, and especially now, and we're talking internationally, the global South, have had enough bullshit,
Right.
and are willing now to fight back. So
When you
see
see
this
World War II being a battle over the resources of Europe at the time, mainly when it came to Russia and America, right? It ended up like World War III will probably be about the resources of the global South, if anything. And you've been seeing this. China and Russia are willing to go to bat for some of these fucking resources if they need it. Like,
well, as I said to you earlier, China has been playing 4D chess with Africa for a long time, and now Russia is beginning to as well.
right.
So in terms of Russia paying off debts in African countries that were, the fault of the West, China's already had the infrastructure plans in place for decades now. And as Traore said, we have love. And I'm going to make the argument, our Russia and China, you can make the argument whether Russia and China is better. To me, they're both capitalist in, I would say, a more diplomatic way compared to the West. But at least for them, the argument that I can make for Russia and China is that they're offering something tangible
In return, yeah.
to African countries. It's not perfect, but it's something that African leaders can recognize as,
it's also,
this is actually good for us.
Look, your team's only as good as your lowest player. Like, and if it takes Russia and China increasing not only their infrastructure, but their military infrastructure on top of that, right? All they got to do is give them arms and bases, you know,
Right.
like we've been doing elsewhere, except we put our own bases and our own stuff there as opposed to giving it to them. You can make allies that will fight for you if that's what you need, which they are willing to do. So
Right.
it's also on top of, I mean, we covered this last week by way of like a Soviet cartoon from the 60s. They've been a lot better to Africa than we have by far.
Right. Right.
Like, it's not even a question.
Right.
You know,
at least Russia China has had its issues, but
yes. But even China can sympathize with being that oppressed as they are, because China was for a long time. So
right, at least back then, yes.
Right.
But the argument that I'm making is not argument, but what I'm saying right now, don't think that just because it's Niger seeming, well, one, it's not small, and I think that's our problem here, is that we think all these countries are small and insignificant. No, they're not. With the resources they have, and like Desmond Manus said, I did not know about the pipeline. I just read that it's being proposed to bring natural gas. Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's why it's working. They basically have to go essentially to war over this because they bombed the Nord Stream pipeline. So how else are they going to get? And where else are they going to get their energy from? They're going to get it from Africa, and now those countries are now beginning to rise up and being able to now saying, no, we're not taking this shit anymore. We're not going to back down now. That poses a problem to the West, and so for the West, they're going to be like, okay, well, we're going to have to go to war with you in order to steal the resources that we've been taking from you for centuries. And now with BRICS, part of players too, Africa has Russia and China as allies.
Yep.
Nuclear allies. So potentially, like in the short term, that's going to affect our wallets.
Oh yeah, already is.
Like, friend of the show, Jose Vega, I didn't pull this, but he sent a tweet out earlier where he posted his energy bill for his apartment in New York City, $500 for a month. Like, and I've said this several times on the show, like over the course of the last few months, like, wait come this winter. Like, if you thought that last year was bad, this winter, especially how things are going in the world, is going to get way worse. Well, gas is already beginning to go back up in certain places. Food is just as expensive and will probably get more expensive. I saw in Yahoo article written that, how Amazon has Prime Day, like they just had Prime Day last month. They're thinking of having another one in October.
Yes.
Why? Because no one has no money. So the capitalists that be are they can't not afford not to make their profits over the holiday season.
Right.
So they need to start having, these sales early to entice people to start buying stuff early, so they're able to have their bottom line, kind of made up by the end of the year.
Yep.
So, so it's sad that people are not
like, if you're in America has for so long been able to ignore its foreign policy, right? Like, that's happening over there. Here, we got our own issues, right? The foreign policy is suffocating all of the things here. All of the resources that you could be using to help here in any capacity are being and pick an issue. It relates to foreign policy at the end of the day.
Right.
Like, you don't think those...
This is why we say... Like, so this is why we say, like... Go ahead, and I'll finish my...
Well, no, like, we have bases and biolabs in hundreds of countries now. You don't think that affects our domestic policy as well? Like, APAC has a giant, like, stranglehold over our shit, you know, as well as NATO as a whole because of that. Like, it's and essentially it's the money powers that be that are willing to maim and murder over these resources, regardless of who's in power, regardless of how much blood will be spilled to get it. They need that shit if they want to fucking live. And that's what we've been telling people about the New World Order or whatever. It's nothing fancy. It's just some rich motherfuckers who know the earth is dying and they want to be good. They want to make sure that they're going to be all right. Like, it's selfish shit at the end of the day. But Americans are so distracted that, like, none of this is, like, in their minds.
This is why, for politicians that do not give a fuck about foreign policy, like, it's especially dangerous.
Yep.
Because their decisions, due to their own ignorance, not thinking it's going to affect us here, more often than not does. So the idea that we're sending money to Ukraine, and I heard somewhere from another YouTuber who read something.
They're about to send another 10 billion.
Right. And Africa is calling out the West, basically being like, we don't want your pity to send us anything when you're not taking care of the people here.
Right.
Africans are saying that.
Right.
They're basically saying charity begins at home. You know, you're trying to take care of folks in Ukraine, but meanwhile, you have people who are homeless here. You have people who are dying of lack of healthcare here. You have people who cannot barely afford, you know, basic needs here. So, you know, and like I said, the fact that this story is not being talked about more, like mainstream media, of course, well, mainstream media is not going to talk about this because in light of Alabama and what happened there, like we've been seeing this, like different waves of opposition against the establishment just kind of bubble up, like in various places.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, that can't be like the mainstream media is smart. They're not going to promote any of this to people to start having ideas at all. But the reality is we're going to see more of this, especially abroad, because, and I think more especially in the global South and more especially in Africa, because they're essentially are going to be the hotbed right now. They're going to be the next Ukraine.
Yes.
Right now, in terms of the resources that they have between, and essentially act as the buffer between Russia, China, and the West. So, and if we go to World War III and potential, in addition to Taiwan, that's going to be a world of hurt here, you know, because where do we get most of our industry from? China. You know, if a lot of those supplies are shut down, we're fucked.
We're fucked.
So, you know, so really, we need to really look at foreign policy a lot more seriously, and especially in Africa, a lot more seriously, because, and as our friend DJ Joe Nice says all the time, the struggle is international. Like, the working class in Africa have had enough and are beginning to rise up and are willing to topple over, you know, their NATO-instated puppets there. You know, what's to say, and I said this to you the other day, what's to say, you know, what happened, you know, in Alabama, if Black people here got together and stood in solidarity in each other in that same way and stomped the White House in millions. Like, could you imagine that if, like, a host of Black people with folding chairs go up to the White House and be like, give us our reparations or whatever issue, fill in the blank. Otherwise, it's about to go down. Like, I would love to see that here in that regard. But
me too.
You know,
they wouldn't let you get to a fucking door. They definitely wouldn't let you in a building.
Well, we already saw that with the George Floyd protest, but I think but as I said, wait in the next few months because, like,
January
if things
6th, they let
continue as
walk
they
right on
go,
through.
right?
So
If things are moving on in a way that I think they're going to, there's going to be a lot more pop-offs like we've seen in this country, and not cultural. It's going to be all economically based, and because people are going to be hurting, especially come winter. So, so we'll see what happens. And like I said, we're actually thinking of talking to. We're actually trying to see if we can get Kit Clarenberg or what's the other guy's name? I just forgot.
Alex?
Yeah, Alex Rubenstein on the show to talk to them about what's happening in Nigeria, because that's especially, nefarious. Given that the
Rubenthal and
president there is-
Blumenstein, attorneys at law.
Yeah, that the Nigerian president is a fucking tool. Very much Western establishment asshole. So it'll be interesting. So even like, as the saying goes, not all skin folk are kinfolk. So like even in Africa, but I think that's more or less a stereotype, is that every African, leader is corrupt. That's not necessarily true. But I think in this case, it's definitely apparent for many of them, especially in ECOWAS, who are basically siding with the West. But it's good to see that a lot of these nations are beginning to overtake the Western powers in their countries and are fighting back militia style. But yeah, like I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Africa in the next few months, and this is definitely something that we want to look at more. But it's sad that not a lot of people, especially, I'm just kind of disappointed with independent media that this story is not getting as much attention as it should, because
I think
will affect us.
I think that'll, even the people who are ignoring it now will have no choice in the long run. But anyway, speaking of,